ਪਾਲੀ ਇਹ ਸਭ ਤੇਰੇ ਨਾਮ ਕਰਨ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰਦੇ ਜੋ ਕੁਝ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਪਾਗਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਚਲਾਂ ਬੱਟੀਆਂ ਵਰਗੇ ਨਾਲੇ ਮੱਤੀ ਹੌਲੀ
Hello. This is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Radio Show. Our government is set up to be a diversified set of officials, all with one obligation and duty in place, which is the protection of your rights. The protection of your ability to be free is the sole and only duty and obligation of your government officials. It is not centralized. It is not a centralized base of power. Our government is not set up to be centralized. It is diversified so that it can never be fully corrupted. That means the federal officials, the state officials, and the local officials, your county officials, all serve as a check and balance system against one another in order to ensure that there is no way that the system can be corrupted. But of all of those officials, of every single one of those officials, the last line of defense is your county officials. They're the ones that live in your neighborhood. They are your neighbors. And it is your county officials, more than any other party, that is sworn and dedicated to the protection of your rights. And of those local officials, there is one official more than any other that is dedicated to your protection, and that is the county sheriff. It is your county sheriff because he is the only police official in the land that is directly elected by the people. The county sheriff is the only police official that is elected by you. So to give you an idea, the city police chief is appointed by the mayor. The police chief is appointed by the mayor and as such is more prone to political influences. Whereas the county sheriff is directly elected by you and as a result has a greater duty to the protection of the people themselves. And as our federal government continues to go rogue on the people, as it continues to turn into a rabid dog ready to bite the owner, it is our county sheriffs that are standing up across the land in defense of their constituents. And this could be evident in one event that happened just over the past year, which was the ATF ruling on the stabilization of pistol braces, okay? The stabilizing pistol braces on guns. The ATF ruled that if a stabilizer is placed on a pistol, that weapon is now outlawed. And they did this. They didn't do this by legislation. They did this by a regulation. In other words, they sought no official of any higher body. They just did it. And in doing so, they set in course a confrontation between them and these men that I'm speaking of, the county sheriffs across the land. However, it is in these times, in the course of history, over our lifetime, the practice has been, the norm has been, the county officials stand down to the feds, including our sheriffs. They've largely been subservient. They've not fulfilled their duty. They've not fulfilled their duty to the citizens. However, these are changing times. And in these times, in darkness is when leadership sometimes appears. And it's beginning to appear today at the county level with the county sheriffs. And so what happened when the ATF did this? There were certain sheriffs that stood up, and they stood up in protection of their rights. And I'm going to talk about three of those sheriffs right now, one of which was Oklahoma County Sheriff Tommy Johnson. And he sent a clear message to the ATF that he will not stay in line, that he will stay in line with his constitutional duties, and he instructed his officers to take no action in enforcing this new ATF regulation, nor would he work with the ATF anyway in the implementation of this ATF regulation. So there you have it. You have one county sheriff that stood up and said, no longer, no more. And that is the beginning of a trend of county sheriffs across the nation beginning to find their feet, find their ability to take a stand against the feds. A next one is the Arkansas Sheriff's Association. They produced an official statement countering the ATF rule and citing Arkansas state laws that prohibit any cooperation with the ATF on the issue. So in other words, across the entire state of Arkansas, the Sheriff's Association stood up and said, no more, we're not doing this nonsense anymore, and they were ready to directly confront the ATF. However, there was one sheriff that took it more than anyone, that took his responsibilities more than anyone, and that is Polk County, Wisconsin Sheriff Brent Walk. And what Sheriff Walk did is he took the most considerable defense of the citizenry, and he not only stated that he will not enforce the ATF rule, but that the rule is in fact a violation of the U.S. Constitution. And his officers will be directed to defend county residents should the ATF enforce the agenda in Polk County. So this Sheriff Walk out of Polk County, Wisconsin, said, not only will I not work with the ATF, but I will stand in front of the ATF in defense of the citizens if they intend to disarm the people in his county. And so there you have it. You have you have the sheriffs finding their true responsibilities, aligning themselves with the United States Constitution. And that is the role of the sheriff. And this is the Chris Heasley Show. And on this show, we will bring you all of the ideas, the content, the information that you need to take back your village, your township, your borough, your city, your county, your state, your country. And we always advocate for local activism first, because at the local level, you get the best bang for your buck. And everybody today is ready to take, and this example right here shows how at the local level, activism works. And I want to ask you a question. Can you imagine if every sheriff across the country took that stand against the feds as our government continues to go rogue? In order for that to happen, it's up to you. It's up to the listeners of the show, the listening audience, to begin getting active in your local county affairs and begin pushing your county sheriff to find their ability to defend the Constitution and defend your rights, and take an active stance against this totalitarian element that's taking hold in our country. And with that said, today we have on our show a candidate for county sheriff. And
how about that?
There you go. So we have on our show today Mike Knox, and I want to say a couple things about our local politics here. I think it's safe to say that the Democrats have owned Harris County for some time, and that's been their safe ground, and they're making a surge into the attached suburban areas like Fort Bend and other local counties. And for a long time in Harris County, we were not putting up formidable candidates because I think that the Republican Party just considered it lost land. But that is changing, and today we have a very credible candidate, Mike Knox, for county sheriff, Republican candidate for county sheriff. And this is our chance to take back Harris County, one of the most key critical counties in the state of Texas and in the country. And just to give you an idea, whereas now today, finally, we have a credible effort to make Harris County Republican again. You can just drive down the road. There are Mike Knox signs everywhere. So he's putting
and there's
together,
still not enough of them.
He's putting together a formidable campaign. Yeah. And again, I'm just calling on all the people in Harris County and Fort Bend County to join this movement. And on either side, I will say that, okay? On either side, join it, but get involved, get active, and take your position, your place as a citizen to begin restoring law and order in Harris County. And with that being said, I'm going to hand the floor over to Mike Knox. And I just want to ask you, tell me about yourself and tell me why you're running for county sheriff.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your program today. So I was a Houston police officer for many years back in the 80s. I started the very first gang unit in the city of Houston in 1988. And I did that until I wrote a book on the subject in 95, and I left HPD in 95 to pursue a career as a consultant on gang and youth violence. I did that for 22 years, and then decided that I needed to run for office because what I saw was going on the city council I thought was ridiculous. So I ran as a conservative in the city of Houston, which is, by the way, a blue city, and I was elected twice. So I term limited out this past December. And it turns out I really enjoy serving the public. Most of my career has been serving the public in one way or another. And had been watching the sheriff's department for some time, and realized that our sheriff is woefully inept at leadership. The sheriff's department basically is in shambles. The jail is a dangerous place for both the employees and the inmates. The way that they're using a lot of the Democrat talking points to enforce the law, let me just back up and tell you what the actual duties of the sheriff is under the state constitution. In the state of Texas, the sheriff has two jobs. One is to operate the county jail, and the other is to enforce the law in the unincorporated areas of the county. Our current sheriff is failing at both of those because he's applying liberal ideas to law enforcement. And let me just say this. Law enforcement or policing is not a partisan issue. Criminals don't check to see if you're Republican or Democrat before they steal your property. They don't check before they assault you or shoot at you or rob you. They don't check for any of what your political affiliation is. So crime affects everybody, and we need a sheriff that understands their role. Now, as you were speaking earlier, the role of the sheriff is to defend the Constitution and your rights. A lot of people think in this country right now believe that the amendments to the Constitution, particularly the Second Amendment, all those amendments are rights granted to you by the government. But in fact, they exist as a restriction on government to influence your rights. So those are just the first 10 are articulated to do that. And every law enforcement officer in this country takes an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States and the state of Texas against enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, from domestic is the key issue. Not only, crime, organized crime and that sort of thing that may develop here domestically, but it's also the sheriff's duty is to protect you from your government if your government gets out of hand. A perfect example of that happened in COVID, where the governor of the state of Texas issued a mask mandate, as did the county sheriff in both Fort Bend and Harris County and all the counties around. All these elected officials were issuing these administrative directives, executive orders, if you will. None of those executive orders are law. They are the will of the executive. And any sheriff that would enforce that mask mandate would be outside of his role as a sheriff. So whether it's a Republican or Democrat doing these things, your sheriff needs to stand up and say, no, we're not going to enforce that. We're not going to make people wear a mask. We're not going to arrest you for not wearing a mask. We're not going to write you a ticket for not wearing a mask. That's an administrative function, not a law enforcement function. And so that's where your sheriff can really make an impact in those kinds of issues. And like you said about the stabilizing braces on firearms, those were developed primarily for handicapped individuals who wanted to enjoy their Second Amendment right, but couldn't because it requires a steady hand. And if they only have one arm or one hand, they need something to help them stabilize when they're shooting at their targets or what have you. And so that's what they were created for. But at any rate, why am I running for sheriff? Because our county needs to get back to basics. Our county needs to get back to understanding the role of government. It's not the role of the sheriff to fix your neuroses or your psychoses. It's not the role of the sheriff to engage in DEI or anything else. The role of the sheriff is simply to enforce the law and to operate the county jail. The county jail is a place that should be secure, where people are accused of a crime, they can't post bond for one reason or another, and they have to stay there. It's the job of the sheriff to keep those inmates safe and alive long enough to get to their day in court. Most people in the county jail are presumed innocent because they've been accused of a crime but not yet convicted. So it's incumbent while they're in custody that the sheriff take that role very seriously and make sure that the violence level is down, that they're not going to die from overdoses or lack of medication or 1,000 other things that happen in the jail. And that requires supervision. And that's what I don't see happening in our current Harris County jail. And that's what I want to fix.
Okay, that was excellent. So you give me so much to
Don't get me started.
No. I mean, because okay, so I'll here's where I'm coming from. So I personally led the effort against masks in Fort Bend County. I don't want to say I personally did it, but I was an integral role with a number of citizens, and we played a big part in confronting county officials on the masks. And I've had a lot of candidates come in here and say that, oh, well, the governor, the governor had the EO and he's a Republican, the executive order, and so no, you got to implement it. So what happened is I confronted one of these sheriff's deputies, because how I interpret it is like this. What the county officials did is they wanted to go totalitarian in Fort Bend County. Of course, you walk in steps and inches, and then you move to larger strides. The first step was just simply getting that mask on the people, and especially on the children. Once you get that mask on the children, you've now taken the first step to take the rights away from the parent, so on and so forth. And so we knew where they were going with that. And what they did, though, it was evil brilliance, because they had the sheriff deputies take all the risk, because it's the sheriff deputies that are obligated by the color of law. They can only give lawful commands. And so when the sheriff's deputies are out there telling us to put our masks on, it's them that are going to get sued, and the county commissioner's court is free and clear. So they're basically, scapegoating, or I don't know what the word is, but they're actually, I want to use a different word. I can't use it on air, but they are pimping out the sheriff's deputies.
Right.
And those are the guys that are going to pay the consequences. By the way, they did the same thing to teachers, because those teachers, they told the teachers, you got to put the masks on the kids. And those teachers are not doctors, and that's called a medical regiment. Doctors can only give medical regiments. So that means when these kids, should they come down with cardiovascular issues, they can go back and sue those teachers.
Well, you're absolutely right about all of that. And let me just say this. I'm not anti-mask, okay? But I believe that's an individual choice. And I think the government should have said, well, this is something you can do if you want to make yourself feel better about, whether you're going to get a disease or not. But the fact of the matter remains, they didn't do that. It was a mandate. So you must wear your mask. If you don't wear your mask, then you're endangering everyone around you. And the fact of the matter is, the COVID virus was evidently the smartest disease we've ever had, because, it would only go 6 feet from you. Where did they come up with that number? How did, the whole thing was bad science. And everybody at the time was talking about follow the science, follow the science. Well, if you know anything about science, you know that science is skeptical. Scientists don't believe other scientists. That's why they do repetitive experiments to prove or disprove some theory. The whole existence of science is based on the principle that you can't trust what anybody tells you. And so that's why science continues to improve. So trusting the science in itself was a bad idea, particularly for governments. Anyway, back to the sheriff issue. So it is incumbent upon the sheriff to understand their role and to stay in their lane. It's not the sheriff's responsibility to come up with social policy. It's the sheriff's responsibility in Harris County or anywhere in Texas to operate the jail and make it safe for the inmates and the employees, and to enforce the law as written in the Texas Penal Code, in the Code of Criminal Procedures, in the Texas Motor Vehicle Code. Those are laws, and we need to enforce those for the safe health and safety of everybody in the community. At the same time, if a sheriff believes, look, I know a lot of legislators. I've dealt with legislators for a long time, and what I know about legislators is they're not any smarter than me. I'm as smart as they are. They're as smart as I am. And we all make mistakes. And a lot of these laws that our legislators pass will not stand the test of the appellate court system. And so until the law has made it through to the Supreme Court, the sheriff can make a determination whether or not that law is valid under the Constitution. And if it doesn't meet the mustard, if it doesn't hold up to that test level, then the sheriff has no obligation to enforce it. And so just because the Texas legislature passed a law, for example, this is not going to happen, but if at least anytime in the near future, if the Texas legislature passed a law that said you had to identify what firearms you own to your local sheriff, No, that's unconstitutional. We're not going to do that. Even if they passed a law like that, as if I were sheriff, I would not enforce that until it made it all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, if the Supreme Court ruled that that was legitimate, well, then in our Constitution, the Supreme Court is the last court of reference for laws. So we would have to enforce it then. But trust me, it's not going to make it there.
Well, there's a couple other things. By staying in line with the Constitution, so what they tried doing by getting the officers to implement these policies is what it did. It gave the ability for county officials to jump over the state legislature and, in effect, be a state legislature because they're nullifying state law.
Or any regulation, like any kind of regulation that comes from a bureaucratic agency of government, does not carry with it the force of law unless the law enforcement community accepts it and engages. If you don't accept it and you don't engage, then it's unenforceable. Any kind of the health department or whoever comes up with these regulations, these rules take the effect of law because we allow it.
Well, I think
and your sheriff is your line of defense there. If you want to enforce it civilly, great, go for it, because the sheriff isn't involved in civil stuff. But if you want the sheriff's department to write citations, to arrest people, to detain them, to bring them before the bar of justice in a criminal setting where you face prison time, then no, those do not carry the weight of law.
Well, the other thing is by allowing these executive orders to be put in place, by not standing in line with the Constitution, it creates a distrust and a resentment between officer and citizen.
That's right.
And that relationship between officer and citizen is the essence of what we need in order for a society to work. So I would think that that's very interesting that your perspective on that. But so go ahead and give me the state of what is the state of Harris County Sheriff's Office today?
Well, the Harris County Sheriff's Department is in complete disarray. In fact, when I'm elected, I'm going to have to restructure the whole thing. Right now, we have a sheriff who has had a lot of his friends come in from HPD and other places, have taken on leadership roles in the Sheriff's Department, and many of their policies, particularly the patrol area, are limiting officers in their ability. They're being over supervised, for example, but even those supervisors aren't being supervised. So it's pretty much chaos among the rank and file deputies who are enforcing the law. In the jail, the sheriff really hasn't participated. He's not interested in the safety of the jail, and that's evident over the past 8 years that he's been sheriff. They've rarely passed a state jail inspection. In fact, I think for 3 years in a row, they didn't pass any. They recently passed one, but it was with technical assistance. In other words, the state Texas Jail Commission just passed them because they felt like they needed to for some reason. But at any rate, within the jail, the mortality rate is about 2.5 people per month die in the county jail. And when you take that over the course of years, there's been over 70 or maybe 80 people that have died in the past 3 or 4 years in Harris County Jail. And they're dying from lack of medication. We have people dying from diabetes who haven't got their medicine in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We have people dying from drug overdoses because we have one inmate that was operating a drug ring inside the jail, and he amassed $30,000 in his commissary account from the sale of narcotics inside the jail. And how does that happen? How does an inmate amass $30,000 in his commissary account, which the sheriff's department monitors, and not ring a bell like, what's going on with this guy? For those of you who are not familiar, commissary accounts are important to inmates because they purchase their own toiletry items and those kinds of things. But there's nothing in there worth more than $5. So why do you need $30,000 in your commissary account? That should be a red flag of something. We have lawyers coming in the jail bringing papers that are soaked in kush or fentanyl or cocaine or whatever, saturated with that, and they're infiltrating the jail so people are overdosing on those kinds of things. So there's a lack of supervision, there's a lack of leadership, and every single time the Texas Jail Commission has a hearing about the Harris County Jail in Austin, the sheriff sends a subordinate. He sends his chief deputy or one of his deputies or his chief of staff, but he never appears. Seems to me that if that's your number one priority, you're going to be there to negotiate and talk with your governing body who's over the jail standards. You're going to talk to them. In fact, at the last one, his subordinate was asked the question, well, you ship out a lot of these inmates to Mississippi and Louisiana and other jails throughout the state of Texas. Do you vet them to discover whether they meet the standards that we require of inmates in Harris County or in the state of Texas? And that subordinate looked at the commission and said, well, that's your job. It's not their job. It's the job of the sheriff to make sure that the people that we detain are being held to the same standard wherever they are. And that's the kind of thing that's going on. It's just a big mess over there.
So, one of the things I think that everyone needs to realize is there's a lot of neighborhoods in Harris County that have gone downward, right? Mm-hmm. They're not safe. And every neighborhood starts out as a good neighborhood. Houston and Harris County 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, it was all walking neighborhoods where you could take your family out for a walk at night. And now we see just some really frightful situations out there. Mm-hmm. I live right on the border of Fort Bend and Harris County, and I drive just into Harris County, and I go on the 59 South HOV endpoint, the feeder lane for the HOV lane, and it's become a homeless encampment. Mm-hmm. And so when you drive in that little section that I just mentioned, you will see prostitution, you will see hypodermic needles, you'll see bottles filled with urine, you'll see homeless everywhere, you'll see unclothed homeless. It's not a good sight. You'll see makeshift houses out of cardboard boxes and put together pieces of wood. And I can only imagine the crime, the assaults that are happening in that little section. And I'm just, what happens when it starts bleeding over into my neighborhood? Those are the kind of thoughts going into my head. But tell me what your opinion is on, because I don't consider Houston healthy. Tell me what your opinion is on Houston, on Harris County, and why it's in the state that it is.
Well, it has to do with, look, I had a conversation many years ago with the district attorney of Harris County at the time, was Johnny Holmes, when I was first on the police department. And I asked him this question, why do we bother to enforce some of these silly laws that we have on the books that are antiquated or what have you? And he looked at me, kind of laughed, and he said, well, Mike, I'll tell you this. He says, if we don't enforce those laws, then those laws will continue to remain on the books. So the best way to deal with a silly law or a law that's antiquated is to enforce it a lot. Because if you enforce it a lot, then everyone will know how silly that law is, and the population will hire legislators to go to Austin and change that law. If you don't do that, if you decide on your own that the law is silly and you're not going to enforce it, well, then that law remains on the books, and someday some wild-eyed young prosecutor will prosecute you on that law. So he said, it's not my job as the district attorney to decide which laws are good and which laws are bad or which laws are silly or serious. It's my job to enforce the law. So if you bring to me reasonable suspicion, probable cause, and you've met the elements in your investigation, you've described the elements of the offense, I will prosecute all of the laws. And that's the approach that sheriffs need to take. But today, we want to be kinder and gentler. In fact, the county jail no longer refers to inmates as inmates. They're referred to as residents of the jail. Now, first of all, you shouldn't be living in the jail, number one. The second thing is they've stopped referring to their deputies as deputies. They now refer to them as team members. It sounds like he's running a Starbucks, for heaven's sake. And so this is where law enforcement is getting into this kinder, gentler, it's the role of law enforcement to help everybody with every issue. That's not the case. That's the role of government, perhaps, to provide mental health care facilities and drug rehabilitation and all those kinds of things. But the job of law enforcement is to find people that they believe that are involved in a crime and introduce them to the criminal justice system and let the criminal justice system determine their innocence or guilt and then what to do about them. The job of the sheriff is very simple. You detain people that are under arrest. You keep them alive to go to court. You enforce the law, all of them, irrespective of what you think about the law, and you let courts decide. Well, in today's policing world, particularly with local police in Houston, the chief of police does the will of the mayor because he's hired and fired by the mayor. And so if you have a liberal mayor, you get liberal policies, and those policies bleed all the way down, which allows homeless people to remain in public areas without any kind of policy about moving them to other places. The same is true in the county. And so when you have a county sheriff who is interested in this liberal agenda of kinder, gentler law enforcement, almost like, the crime occurs because people had a bad childhood or all these little ideas that they've got, you forget that the point of the law is to hold people accountable for the choices they make. And there's a lot of people that have bad childhoods that don't have a problem getting arrested. Why is that? Well, because they have learned that the decisions they make are what matters now. And if they make a bad decision, they expect bad results. But when you have a legal system, including the sheriff's department, who believes it's not the criminal's fault that he's a criminal, and we should do everything we can to bend over backwards to try to get him whatever help he needs, then we're not holding anyone accountable, and that encourages more people to commit crime. There's a rule of 10 in law enforcement. 10% of any population will commit a felony if given the opportunity and they believe they won't get caught, or if they get caught, they won't be held accountable. In Harris County, that's 470,000 people who are willing to commit a felony. 1% of that population, that total population, 47,000, are career criminals. We have jail space for 10,000 people in the Harris County Jail. So when you start allowing people to have like bonding issues or low bonds or getting out on personal recognizance bonds, you're revolving that door. That tells all that 470,000 that if they get caught, they're not going to be punished, and that increases your crime. When you look at statistically, like the constable program where they have deputies in neighborhoods, the contract deputy program. When you look at the crime in those neighborhoods where they have contract deputies, it's usually at least 30% below the surrounding area. Why is that? Because they have boots on the ground. If you want to reduce crime in Harris County, you have to have boots on the ground. You have to have people out there enforcing those laws, and they have to enforce all of them. And when people believe they get caught, and if they get caught, they'll be punished, then they'll stop doing that crime, and you will see a lowering of that crime rate, and you'll see less homelessness as well.
I think the way you're describing it is that it's sort of like a lack of seriousness in our county government across the board, and I certainly agree with that. Mm-hmm. We have witnessed our police officers begin to push leftist position points, and what I'm referring to is on our official Houston Police Department cars. They have been decorated with homosexual stickers, and I don't know what to say about that. It's absurd. The idea that our city police officers are now promoting a sexual practice is beyond normal. It's not healthy. It's not well. Who is making these decisions? These are not serious men. What's your opinion on those stickers being put on the cars?
Well, I think a more clear example is during the Gay Pride Parade, the City of Houston Police Department has a police car decorated in rainbow colors that they run through that parade, indicating the support of the police department for this community. And we should support everybody. But if you're going to do that, then you better start having a policy where other organizations can get a police car decorated in their thing. Clearly, this is a political statement being made by the mayor at the time, who was Sylvester Turner. And and the police chief, Art Acevedo, who wanted to pander to particular special interest groups. And that's not the role of law enforcement. Law enforcement should be fair and impartial to everyone. And so the best policy is not to have any kind of sticker like that on your police car or any kind of decoration like that on your police car. It's not your job to promote anybody's special interest. It is your job to enforce the law as written. And we've seen as society has become more liberal, particularly in Harris County, that there's more of a push to support and endorse fringe left-wing causes like this in an effort to show, I don't know what, I guess to show respect or whatever. But the point is that when you do that, you actually encourage that behavior. So it's not our job in law enforcement to encourage anything other than adherence to the law. And the only way to do that is to remain aloof or independent from all of those special interest groups. And that's what we're going to do in the Harris County Sheriff under my control.
You mentioned Art Acevedo's name, and there is one blemish on his resume that is considerable, and that is the Harding Street raid, where two innocent Houstonian residents were gunned down in cold-blooded, I want to say murder, by our own officers. And, that was on his watch. And imagine the shot of fear that sent through the people of Houston, knowing that their own officers could kick in their doors and do that sort of a type of an assault on the residents. What is your opinion on that raid? What is your knowledge of it? I feel like it left a lasting mark on our police forces. Of course, I want it removed. I want them restored to what the respect that they deserve. But that was a pretty bad thing.
Yes, it was, and I can tell you, for having worked in HPD for many years, that's not the typical behavior. Apparently, what appears to me, and I don't have any inside information on it, but there's a lot of pressure for narcotics officers to produce arrests, right? So I think perhaps this guy probably, was just in a heart, he just wanted to make his monthly totals and was running short and decided to just invent a case on somebody, which is always wrong and should always be prosecuted, actually. In this case, that fictitious warrant, which evidently he lied about, and brought before a judge, they got this arrest warrant. What they didn't realize was that the people that lived in that home also had firearms, and they knew they were innocent, and they didn't know what was going on. And so they attempted to defend themselves, and they ended up shooting a police officer, and they got shot and killed themselves. Well, I think what's going to happen in that case is what should happen, and that person responsible or those people responsible are going to face the bar of justice and get what they deserve. And that's what every law enforcement should support. It is the enforcement of the law without regard to your status or your particular. And so I think it's going to work out. In this case, it's unfortunate for the two people who were killed, but I don't think the police department or any police department would tolerate that then or now. It's just that these things come up, and often you don't know about them until they do. So yeah, that was a bad. To catch a phrase, that was a dope deal gone bad.
Well, I feel like it's a sign that our county government, our police department at that time. By the way, Art Acevedo was the man who oversaw the implementation of the homosexual stickers on the cars, and at the same time, this thing happened. And I feel like when you lose sight of what the actual goal, the objectives are of your organization, bad things happen.
Well, remember that Art Acevedo was hired by Sylvester Turner, and he reflected the values of Sylvester Turner at the time. So, yes, that's exactly right. Art Acevedo was more of a politician than a police officer.
Right.
And that's what aggravated me the most about him is that there's policies in the Houston Police Department that I know exist, and one of those policies is you're not allowed to participate in any public demonstration in uniform on duty. And yet he's walking arm in arm with BLM and Gay Pride and all these special interest groups in uniform, in the middle of this parade, marking in solidarity with them. Well, that sends a message that the police department is supporting that group in in excess of the supporting the rest of the community. And that's a bad signal. And that's why those policies exist. And so Art was more of a politician than a police chief. And I'm glad that he's gone, actually. Hopefully we've got a Texas Ranger over there now, so maybe I'm looking forward to working with
who's
him.
The Texas Ranger?
Noe Diaz is he's a former Texas Ranger who's now the chief of police in the city of Houston. Now he is also going to reflect the values of our current mayor, John Whitmire, and hopefully that will be better for the citizens of Houston. Nevertheless, as the sheriff, I'm elected by the people. I don't have to deal with a superior who can fire me. It is the people of Harris County that can do that, and only the people of Harris County. A lot of people don't realize this, Chris, but the sheriff carries the same weight as the county judge. I mean, they're on an equal footing. They're not superior or subordinate to each other. So that's something that the new sheriff, that our current sheriff, doesn't understand. He thinks he works for the commissioner's court. And in fact, the sheriff works for the people of Harris County, does not work for the commissioner's court.
So we got one caller on the line, I believe, so we're going to need to put these headsets on. Sorry to make you take that hat off.
That's all right.
All righty. And G2, are you there? I think we have a caller. G2, are you there? No? Let me try to... One second. G2, are you there?
Hello?
G2? Maybe we lost him. Okay, that's okay.
Well, we'll just put the hat back on.
So, what is the state of your campaign today?
Right now, we're blowing and going. You know, I think we're making some real inroads. The current sheriff has a lot of scandals. I mean, we've got people escaping from the jail. We've got drug rings. We've got people dying in the jail. Crime is although he reports that crime is down this year from last year, but last year's crime rate was 30 or 40% higher than it was when he took office. So it's a matter of, it's about looking at statistics and making them say what you want to say. Oh, we're, 10% down from last year. Yeah, but we're 50% higher last year than we were when he first took office. So it's still really high, and people don't feel that they're safer anymore. So he's vulnerable in those areas, and we are attacking those areas pretty aggressively. I'm getting a lot of support from a wide section of the community, and I think we stand a very, very good chance of beating this if people will show up to vote and will vote their values, and they will vote for their Constitution. Then I should win.
Yeah, I like how the Texas Democrats, they play with funny numbers, right? The crime wave is off the charts, but it went down a tick, and so therefore he has some sort of a good mark on his resume. It's
well, you spin that as it's moving in the right direction for now. What's interesting about this is the mortality rate in the county jail has actually diminished since last year. And why? Well, the sheriff started paying attention to the county jail and started, doing the things that I've been talking about doing. And so they've reduced the number of deaths to its current level. But the thing is, why did it take him, 5 years or 6 years to do that, or 7 years? Because this year's an election year. He got his staff, I think, a 12% pay raise for the deputies and the guards in the jail. Well, why didn't he do that 5 years ago or 6 years ago or 7 years ago? Because he didn't have any vision. He's just putting out fires. He wants to remain elected, so he knows that he's got to fix the jail. So now it's important to him. It needs to be important to him from day one. It should have been important to him. Like, he just presented a 3-year plan how to fix the sheriff's department at the last commissioner's court hearing. Well, where was that 3-year plan 8 years ago? Where was that 3-year plan 4 years ago? Where was that 3-year plan 3 years ago? Why are you suddenly having a 3-year plan now? Well, it's because you want to stay elected. I've got a plan to deal with these issues going forward from day one, and we're going to first start with accountability all the way from the top to the bottom of the sheriff's department. We're going to open up in transparency with our public and let them see what's going on. I want to do a dashboard, for example, a public-facing dashboard where you can see what charges our deputies are filing, what courts they're filed in, what the bond on those court cases were, what the disposition of the case was, and which court and which judge was responsible for those. So people can see what their criminal justice system is doing. You can get that information, but it costs you a lot of money with a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request. But the sheriff has that information. He can just put it on public view. And that's one of the things that I want to do. We're going to hold, and by doing that, the sheriff's department can hold our judges accountable and our commissioner's court. I don't know if this is interesting to your audience or not, but the sheriff has basically subordinated his department under the commissioner's court. And he's done that in two ways. First of all, he's changing policies, hiring policies and disciplinary policies to more accurately reflect the policies of the commissioner's court and other employees of the county, which means a lot of DEI policies in there. And secondarily, he can't figure out what's wrong with the jail, so the commissioner's court decided to take some action. They formed a committee to find out what's going on in the jail and how to fix it, but they were kind enough to put the sheriff on that committee, right? It's his job to do that. It's his job to form that committee if he wants to. It's his job to operate that jail. And so rather than do it himself, he's pawning that responsibility off. And by doing that, he is suborning his responsibility under the state constitution. We need somebody in there that understands their role and is willing to accept the responsibility for those things and take action to make the people of Harris County safer. And that has to do with serious approach, standards, policies, and practices that promote transparency and accountability.
Well, we're at the end of the show here.
Oh.
I'm going to list the topics that we didn't get to, and unfortunately, I'm going to put them out there, but you will not have a time to cover them. But
Okay.
We'll cover this at another time. But the things I wanted to talk about was I shouldn't say it because you can't respond, but these county sheriffs that are aligning in a political way to stop the mess at the border. Just would you join that organization?
Actually,
I think our Harris County and our Fort Bend County sheriffs are not joining that organization.
yes, I will. It's called the Constitutional Sheriffs, and yes, I intend to be an active part of that. On the immigration thing, we don't have ICE in the jail anymore. We're not keeping track of all of that. Yes, we need to use all of our tools in our toolbox, which includes the federal government when and where it's appropriate.
Okay, and so just to clarify for the citizens, for the audience, there is a group of sheriffs that are aligning. They essentially said that they will make whatever efforts they can to protect the border to the best of their ability. Mm-hmm. And it is my understanding that our current county sheriff in Fort Bend County and our current county sheriff in Harris County have not signed that pledge, as I understand it. But Mike Knox is saying that he would.
Well, I don't sign pledges. I've made two pledges. One is to my wife to stay married to her for the rest of our lives, and the other is to defend the Constitution of the United States and the state of Texas. I've made multiple pledges on that. And what you're talking about has to do with that second pledge to protect the Constitution, and I will do that.
Excellent. Very good. Mike, it was incredible. I do appreciate your time. I wish you luck in your campaign, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Absolutely.
The bomb.